It was a sunny Thursday morning in Los Angeles when Karoline Leavitt opened an unexpected email. Subject: You've been invited to appear on the Ellen DeGeneres show topic, The Generational Divide in American Politics. At first glance, it looked like a standard media booking. But something about the wording, divide, made her pause. Her team wasn't convinced. "It's Ellen," one of her aides muttered, tapping the email. "She smiles on camera but throws shade with punchlines. This could be a setup." Karoline leaned back in her chair at the small DC press office. Her navy blue blazer hung neatly on the door behind her. On her desk sat her worn-out pocket Constitution, its corners curled, the cover faded from years of use. "Let her try," Karoline said evenly. "If she wants a joke, I'll bring the punchline. Truth." By the time her plane touched down at LAX, social media was already ablaze. Liberal influencers sneered, "Why is Ellen giving Trump's press girl a platform?" Conservative accounts warned, "Watch your back. Don't walk into a trap." But Karoline wasn't rattled. She'd been underestimated before. Backstage at Warner Brothers' studio, a stylist approached with a soft pastel blazer and asked if she wanted to lighten the look. Karoline smiled, politely, and declined. "I'm not here to blend in," she said, slipping on her silver cross necklace and smoothing out her deep blue blouse. She didn't need wardrobe theatrics, just conviction, clarity, and control. On the other side of the curtain, Ellen was reviewing her cue cards. She handed one back to her producer. "Let's make this interesting," she smirked. "Tension gets views." The curtain lifted. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Karoline Leavitt." Cheers rang out, mixed with some boos. The crowd was divided, just like the country. Karoline stepped into the spotlight. Her smile was calm, her back straight. She shook Ellen's hand and took her seat. Ellen's grin was as polished as ever, but her eyes were calculating. After a few warm-up questions, Ellen leaned in with the real one. "You're young, ambitious, and working for one of the most controversial men in America. Don't you ever wonder if you're just reading someone else's script?" The audience chuckled, nervously. Karoline didn't blink. "Actually, Ellen," she said smoothly, her tone like ice over steel, "I've been writing my own story since college, and I don't need applause to validate it." A flicker passed over Ellen's face. It had begun. The air in the studio shifted. The smile on Ellen's face twitched, just enough to show the hit had landed. "Touché," Ellen said, shifting in her seat. "But let's be real. When you speak for Donald Trump, doesn't that come with a lot of baggage?" Karoline didn't flinch. She leaned in slightly, her eyes unwavering. "If by baggage, you mean economic strength, secure borders, and the courage to stand up to global bullies, then yes, I carry it proudly." A few claps rose from the conservative side of the audience. Ellen's chuckle was thinner now. Her tone sharpened. "Oh, come on, you don't really believe all that, do you?" Karoline gave her a measured look. "I don't believe it. I lived it. And I watched millions of Americans benefit from policies that put them first. Not donors, not Hollywood, not trending hashtags." A hush fell over the crowd. Even some of Ellen's usual audience looked unsure. "Do you really believe what you're saying?" Ellen asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or are you just trying to be the next viral mouthpiece?" It was classic Ellen, casual delivery, punchline hidden in a jab. The audience laughed, but Karoline didn't. Instead, she calmly reached beneath her chair and pulled out a folded document, printed, highlighted, ready. "Here's something funny, Ellen," she said, unfolding the paper. Ellen blinked, slowly. "According to your own 2018 interview," Karoline continued, "you praised Trump's economic plan for bringing factory jobs back to middle America. So what changed? Was it the facts or the politics?" The studio gasped. Audibly, the energy shifted. Ellen stiffened. She hadn't expected research. "You mock people like me for standing by our beliefs," Karoline said, her voice low but firm. "But what really bothers you is that we don't back down, even when we're outnumbered, even here." Ellen tried to recover. You're passionate, she said with a performative smile. I'll give you that. But passion without compassion is just noise. Karoline tilted her head slightly, calm as ever. And compassion without truth? She said. That's Hollywood. That landed hard. The audience stirred. Murmurs, a few nods, visible discomfort in the front row. In the control room, a voice whispered into Ellen's earpiece, "She's flipping the room! Move on!" But Ellen didn't move on. Not yet. "Oh, I've got more," she said, her grin tightening. "Let's talk about women's rights, shall we? You claim to support women, but you work for a man accused by multiple women. How do you sleep at night?" Gasps, applause, a few cheers from the left side of the room. Karoline didn't blink. "I sleep just fine," she said clearly, "because I don't reduce women to victims. I believe in their strength, not their slogans." Silence. Then a ripple of reaction across the audience. This wasn't comedy anymore. It was a collision. Ellen tapped her cue cards, a subtle move, hiding nerves behind professionalism. Normally, a dig like that would bring down the house. But tonight, the crowd wasn't playing along. Karoline sat like a statue, composed, unshaken, her silver cross necklace catching the studio lights. "You see, Ellen," she said, voice steady as a verdict, "people don't tune in to watch a political ambush disguised as comedy. They tune in for truth, even when it stings." Backstage, a crew member looked at another and mouthed, "She's winning." Ellen forced a chuckle. "You're a tough one, I'll give you that. But truth is complicated, and I'm not sure you see the whole picture." Karoline answered instantly. "Maybe not," she said, "but I see enough to know that faith, hard work, and love of country aren't punchlines, and every time someone on your side talks about unity, you somehow forget to include people like me." Applause, this time loud and scattered like lightning across the studio. Ellen hesitated. "I don't understand struggle?" Karoline pressed forward, seizing the silence. "Maybe I haven't lived your version of it, but I know what it's like to be ridiculed for your values, to walk into rooms where people laugh before you speak, to stand your ground when it's easier to blend in." More applause, from both sides, and Ellen, for the first time in the interview, said nothing. "Understand struggle?" Karoline repeated, her voice rising just enough to quiet the last of the murmurs. "I grew up in a middle-class New Hampshire family where we packed lunches, not privilege." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I paid my way through school. I interned, I hustled, I failed. And I stood back up. What I didn't do was inherit a talk show, millions of dollars, and a platform to mock people for their values." Boom! The audience stirred. Some clapped reflexively. Others froze in surprise. Whispers broke out. A few stunned gasps echoed through the studio. For the first time that night, Ellen's trademark smile cracked, just barely. She looked smaller, now tucked behind the massive desk that once made her untouchable. "You think I mock people?" she asked quietly. "Quiet now." Karoline's reply was instant, calm, unforgiving. "I think you use laughter to avoid accountability, but not today." Ellen leaned back in her chair. The card in her hand, once a tool of control, now trembled slightly between her fingers. Heads in the audience turned. The tension was thick, the air electric. And then, it happened. From backstage, a voice rang out. "She's not wrong!" Everyone froze. Ellen twisted around in her seat. So did the cameras. A young crew member, probably in his 20s, stepped just into view at the edge of the set. "I grew up watching this show," he said, his voice cracking with nervous honesty, "but she's saying things I wish someone had said 10 years ago." Silence. Real silence. Then, a burst of whispers. A wave of real, unfiltered emotion. Karoline didn't even glance back. She didn't need to. The momentum had shifted, not just in the room, but in the story itself. Ellen straightened quickly, blinking. She turned toward the camera. "Let's take a break," she said with a brittle smile. The lights dimmed. The show went to commercial, but no one was laughing. Backstage, everything was in motion. Producers barked into headsets. Crew scurried like chess pieces mid-checkmate. A senior producer sprinted to Ellen. "We need to pivot," he whispered urgently. "Social media's blowing up. Karoline Clapback is trending worldwide." Ellen gave a tight nod. Her face was still, controlled, but visibly shaken. "I've got this," she said through clenched teeth. On stage, Karoline sat in silence. No phone, no notes, just observation. She watched the studio around her like a general surveying a battlefield in the fog between rounds. The pink and blue lights bathed her in contradiction, soft hues over hard truths. She reached for her silver cross necklace and gently adjusted it, not as jewelry, as armor. Her young staffer Maddie stepped out from the wings. "You're trending. Want to see?" Karoline shook her head slowly. "Later. Let's finish what we came here for." Back from break. The lights returned. The theme music played. Ellen's grin was back, but this one didn't have teeth. "Welcome back, everyone," she said lightly. "Things got a little intense before the break. Let's cool things down, shall we?" She turned to Karoline, who was already facing her, eyes locked. "I didn't bring you here to fight," Ellen said. "I brought you here to understand." Karoline didn't blink. "Then maybe next time," she said coolly, "start with a question, not a punchline." The audience oohed, low and sharp, like the sting of cold air through a cracked door. Ellen exhaled. Her posture shifted, softened. "Let's talk about joy for a moment," she offered. "You're a woman in politics. Surely there's something you and I can agree on." Karoline leaned back slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Sure," she said, "that Americans are desperate for honesty and exhausted by performance." This time, the audience didn't murmur. They erupted, not just applause, but something else. Recognition. Ellen knew it. Karoline knew it. And so did everyone watching. "Show's pretending to have it," Karoline said flatly, letting the words hang like smoke. Boom. Ellen's smile cracked, this time visibly. But she wasn't ready to yield. "You know, Karoline," she said, fingers drumming on her armrest, "you're very confident for someone so new." Karoline didn't blink. "And you're very dismissive," she replied, "for someone who claims to uplift women." Gasps, audible, widespread. For the first time, the Ellen Show didn't feel like a haven of safe applause and predictable punchlines. It felt like a reckoning. Ellen gave a tight laugh, thin and nervous. "Well, this has taken quite the turn." Karoline nodded once, steady. "It usually does, when truth walks in." That hit. The crowd, young, old, red, blue, erupted into divided thunder. Some stood, others folded their arms, but everyone was awake now. Ellen, usually the conductor of the studio's emotion, suddenly found herself out of sync. Her control was slipping. The audience, the one that always danced to her rhythm, was playing a new tune. Karoline didn't gloat. She didn't grin. She let the silence bloom. Then she leaned in, her voice softer, deeper, slower. "You know, Ellen, I didn't come here to fight. I came here because you invited me." She paused, long enough for the weight to settle. "But from the moment I sat down, I was treated like a problem, not a guest." Silence. You could hear someone cough in the upper left row. No music, no cutaways, just the still air of real tension. "You say you want unity. You say you want dialogue. But the truth is, you invited me here expecting me to apologize for what I believe before we even had a conversation." Ellen sat frozen. Her fingers curled slightly inward. She wasn't used to being on this end of the challenge. Karoline didn't shout. Her voice was anchored. "You mocked my political views. You questioned my faith. You called my career a script. And now that I push back, She shook her head slowly. Suddenly, I'm being called aggressive. The audience was still, so still it felt cinematic, like a film scene where the music stops for the truth to land. That's not a conversation, Karoline continued. That's a trap. Boom. A single clap, then three, then a wave, hesitant but growing. Not everyone applauded, but enough. Enough to rattle Ellen. The host gave a shaky laugh. You've rehearsed this well. Karoline's eyes met hers, unwavering. No, she said. I've lived it. Another burst of applause. Then, unexpectedly, a voice from the crowd. Let her talk! Ellen shot a glance at her producer, but it was too late. The tide had turned. The audience was no longer hers. Karoline leaned back in her chair, still calm, still in control. I work with a president you don't like. That's fine. We don't have to agree. But I love my country. I believe in its people, and I don't need Hollywood's approval to know what's real. She turned back to Ellen, her tone softening, not as a tactic, but as a human moment. You don't have to agree with me, but if this show is truly about kindness, then maybe start by showing a little. It wasn't delivered like a punchline, but the crowd erupted anyway, not with laughter, with something rarer. Respect. Ellen sat frozen, her jaw clenched just slightly. A faint sheen of sweat glistened along her temple, subtle, but there. She had faced senators, CEOs, presidents, but none like Karoline Leavitt. Because across from her wasn't a celebrity looking for applause. It was a young woman with steel in her spine and no interest in playing nice. And the audience? They weren't laughing anymore. They were listening. Of the studio like smoke after a fire. She tried to clear it with humor. You know, Karoline, she said, her voice just a bit sharper. I've had on world leaders, artists, activists, but I've never had someone come on my show to lecture me. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Then maybe it was overdue. That hit hard. Ellen leaned forward now, voice tightening. You act like you're some kind of hero, but let's be honest. You're a press secretary. You read statements. You deflect, you spin. That's what your job is. Karoline's face didn't change, but her voice did. It dropped a half octave. Calm that hit hard cold. You just described exactly what you're doing right now. The audience gasped. Ellen tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. Oh, come on. Karoline didn't blink. You're spinning because this isn't going how you expected, and instead of adjusting, you're attacking. Ellen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Karoline continued. I didn't come here to be liked. I came here to be honest. If that's threatening, maybe the problem isn't me. That line stuck to the walls of the studio like glue. Then in a moment that changed everything, Ellen fired back with something too sharp, too personal. Maybe if you stopped hiding behind that little cross of yours, people would take you seriously. The audience recoiled. Even the producers looked stunned. Karoline's hand slowly went to her necklace. She didn't touch it. She just let it be seen. Then she stood calmly, quietly. The room froze. She looked at Ellen. Not with anger, but with deep disappointment. This, she said, is what the elite really think of people like me. She turned slightly toward the audience. You mock what I wear. You mock what I believe. And then you pretend you're about kindness. Dead silence. Ellen was visibly shaken. Dead silence. Karoline didn't raise her voice. She didn't storm off. She just said one thing: you just told the world who you really are. And with that, she sat back down. A full 10 seconds of silence followed. Not a single clap. Not a single word. Ellen had crossed a line. And Karoline, she had just turned the entire studio into a courtroom and let America be the jury. The silence after Karoline's last words was thick like fog on a cold battlefield. It wasn't a dramatic silence. It was an uncomfortable one, an exposing one. The kind that makes people shift in their seats and question everything they just saw. Ellen tried to break it. She looked at the camera and gave a weak smile. Well, that got serious fast, but the audience didn't laugh. Karoline didn't. Look at her. She looked straight into the camera. Not with rage, not with defiance, but with calm, unwavering certainty. Millions of Americans wear a cross, she said, voice low. Millions pray quietly before work. Millions stand for the flag and bow, their heads in grief when soldiers come home draped in it. She paused, letting the words settle. If those things make us a punchline in your world, then maybe the joke's not on us. That line hit like a freight train Twitter exploded in. Real time. Within minutes, hashtags exploded across the internet. Jokers. For Ellen. Or mocked faith. Karoline claps. Back, they were trending nationwide. In the control room, panic erupted. Producers barked into headsets. Screens flickered between feeds. A panicked assistant rushed to Ellen's side and flashed a note in bold, underlined red. We're losing the audience. Hard. Back on stage, Ellen shifted in her seat. Her voice, so often a weapon of charm, trembled now. Karoline, I didn't mean it like that. I was just trying to lighten the mood. Karoline turned slowly. Her gaze was calm, composed, but her words struck clean. You can't hide behind comedy when it turns into cruelty. That line cut the air. Then it started. A middle-aged woman in the second row stood, clapped, then a college kid in the back, then more. Not the whole crowd, but enough. Enough to shatter the illusion that Ellen still had control. Then came the shout, "Let her speak!" Ellen's posture stiffened. Her fingers trembled on her cue cards. She flipped to the next segment, then back, then finally gave up. We're, going to cut to commercial. Fade to black. But the damage was done. TikTok. Flooded. Clips of Karoline's poised response. You just told the world who you really are. Spread like wildfire. Captions read, "The moment Ellen lost the room." In the control room, producers stared at their screens in disbelief. Fox. News was already calling Karoline's comms team. Across social media, a new image was being forged, not of a stiff conservative mouthpiece, but of a woman who stood her ground without yelling, who stood for millions by standing still. She wasn't just a guest anymore. Karoline was the story. The show came back from commercial, but the spark was gone. Ellen's voice had a brittle edge as she smiled at the camera. Welcome back. Things got a little passionate there. Let's move on. But America wasn't moving on. By the time the show aired on the West Coast, clips from the East Coast taping had already racked up 3 million views. Fox News aired a segment titled, Ellen versus Faith, Did She Go Too Far? TikTok turned into a war zone. One viral video showed Karoline calmly adjusting her cross, followed by the now iconic line, "You just told the world who you really are." Captioned, "That wasn't a clapback, that was a cultural moment." 7 million views by midnight. Conservative influencers hailed her as the voice of Middle America. Even moderate Democrats commented, "I don't agree with her politics." But Ellen crossed a line. Backstage, Karoline sat quietly with her assistant, Maddie. Her phone buzzed nonstop. News alerts, booking requests, DMs from veterans, nurses, even former atheists. Thank you for standing up. You didn't just speak, you represented. A message popped up from a contact saved as DT. You were brilliant. They needed to see that. Donald Karoline didn't respond. She looked up at Maddie, calm but resolved. We're not done. Book Hannity, Tucker, and CNN back to back. We're taking this national. Across the country, reactions poured in. In a diner outside Des Moines, a waitress paused mid-shift, watching the clip on her phone. She mouthed along with the line as it played again. You just told the world who you really are. She looked up at the screen, then down at her own small silver cross. About damn time someone said it, she muttered. Outside, the wind rolled across a quiet Midwest parking lot, but something had shifted. A conversation had started. and Caroline Whitmore had just lit the match. 1 week after the Ellen interview, Caroline stood on the stage of the National Value Summit in Dallas. Nearly 20,000 people rose to their feet before she uttered a single word. She didn't smile, not yet, because she knew this wasn't about applause anymore. It was about truth. Some said I went too far, she began, her voice steady. Others said I didn't go far enough. The room fell silent. But I didn't show up on Ellen's stage to win a fight. I showed up to remind America that your faith, your values, your identity don't belong to late-night punchlines. The crowd erupted in applause, but she raised her hand to calm them. That moment wasn't about me. It was about all of you, teachers who can't pray out loud, veterans mocked for patriotism, small-town moms told they're outdated. I didn't defend a necklace. I defended a belief. Her words hit like thunder. Within minutes, clips flooded social media. Fox News aired her full speech live. CNN hosted a panel dissecting its tone, message, and impact. Even The View cautiously admitted, she's shaping the conversation whether we like it or not. And Ellen? She stayed silent. Finally, a written apology was released, vague and too late. The damage had been done. Behind the scenes, Caroline's office was flooded with over 15,000 letters in just 5 days, many handwritten, from strangers across the country thanking her for speaking without shouting, for standing when others stayed silent. One note read, "I'm 76. Lost my job for talking about faith at work. You gave me hope again." That letter hung on Caroline's office wall, just beside a framed screen grab from that day on Ellen's stage. Cross visible, eyes calm, shoulders back, a symbol not of outrage but of strength. By month's end, 3 states had introduced new workplace protections for religious expression, citing Caroline's moment as their inspiration. She had become more than a talk show guest. She was a movement. As she left the summit stage, her team asked, "Should we call this a win?" Caroline paused, looking at the cameras trained on her just like that day. "No," she said with a soft smile. "Call it a beginning. Some moments don't just happen on television. Some words aren't just spoken. They echo through hearts, cut through silence, and awaken the conscience of a nation." That day, Karoline Leavitt didn't just defend herself on Ellen's stage. She stood for millions whose faith, values, and identity had been mocked. She didn't stay silent. She stood firm. And with that, she stirred something deeper. This is a story where confidence raised its voice, faith stood its ground, and truth thundered through. But what about you? Would you dare to speak up when the world expects you to stay quiet? If this story moved you, subscribe and don't miss the next episode of Surprising Stories, because in a world still full of untold truths, we'll be here to uncover them, one story at a time. Surprising Stories. This is where real defiance begins.